We saw Olympic-level twists and turns in Beijing, but our athletes can't hold a candle to Texas Republicans. They're showing quad-level flip-flopping that truly merits a gold medal. Last year, the party passed a series of controversial, restrictive state voting laws. The main target? Vote by mail. One new law prohibits local election officials from even encouraging people to vote by mail. Another makes it a felony for those officials to send out applications for mail-in ballots to people who did not request them. But apparently, those laws only apply to Democrats, certainly not to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Now, Patrick, a Republican, sent a mass mailing to thousands of Republican voters across the state. The mailing encouraged them to vote by mail and included, you guessed it, unsolicited applications for mail-in ballots. My next guest is the perfect person to talk about this story. Chris Hollins is the former elections chief in Harris County, Texas. During the 2020 election, he pushed to expand ballot access, and he is now a candidate for mayor of Houston. Welcome. Good to have you. Now, we should note that last week, a federal judge has temporarily blocked part of that Texas voting law that bans officials from encouraging mail-in voting, but that was well after Lieutenant Governor Patrick's mass mailing was sent. So, Chris, with all of that, the Texas Tribune reports that in 2020, Patrick said that efforts to expand vote by mail were, quote, scam by Democrats to steal the election. He also said there was no reason anyone under 65 should be able to say, I'm afraid to go vote during the pandemic. Of course, he himself voted by mail in 2007. The hypocrisy here, though, never ends. What's your reaction when you hear this kind of news and see the actions taken by the lieutenant governor?
Well, good evening, Michael. Thank you for having me. You have to remember a couple things here before we even get started. First of all, Dan Patrick called for three, not one, not two, but three special sessions of the legislature in 2021 to pass these voter suppression laws. That's number one. The second thing is that our newly appointed Secretary of State was a lawyer for Donald Trump in trying to overturn the election in 2020. And so that's where we're starting from. This should be no surprise that the laws that Republicans wrote in 2021 to keep people of color and people in urban centers from voting are being successful right now, and they're achieving those goals. But just lately, Dan Patrick has gone to another level, even confusing his own voters and making sure that Republicans are getting their mail ballots and applications sent to the wrong place and getting rejected, just like those from Texans across the state. And so this is a real travesty that needs to be dealt with. The incompetence, but certainly the intent to disenfranchise thousands upon thousands of Texans.
So, yeah, I mentioned that your role as the elections chief in Harris County, you pushed to expand ballot access ahead of the 2020 election. Texas's new voting restrictions, known as SB 1, were enacted partly because of the work you did. Now, Lieutenant Governor Patrick's campaign consultant, Alan Blakemore, told the Texas Tribune that the restrictions are, quote, guardrails established by the legislature following Harris County's unsuccessful attempt to send applications for mail-in ballots to all of its registered voters in 2020, adding it was that overreach as well as drive-through voting that brought about SB 1. So they pass a law to ban what you did, then disregard that law so they can do the same thing, right?
Absolutely. And let's be clear. Voter suppression laws are being passed in Georgia, in Arizona, in Wisconsin, attempted in Pennsylvania. And so this is not a Texas reaction to Houston area, election clerk, making sure that millions of Harris County people can cast ballots. This is a national effort by Republicans to suppress voters. But moreover, we're very, very proud of what we did to serve our neighbors in 2020 and to ensure that despite your age or your health status, that you could cast a ballot safely and securely. And nearly 1.7 million Houston area voters were able to cast ballots. And so we should be encouraging those types of practices, like drive-through voting, like extended hours and 24-hour voting that we put in place here in Houston in 2020. We shouldn't be discouraging them, and we certainly shouldn't be making them into felonies and putting election administrators in jail for encouraging participation in our democracy, Michael.
So here's the thing that really kind of, I don't understand, Chris. I just don't get it, because as I point out to a lot of my Republican friends, y'all remember how we won in 2010. What we did at the RNC and around the country, it was coordinating and working to expand the opportunity to vote by mail. A lot of our voters are senior citizens. So as we see with this plan, it has backfired dramatically. In Patrick's mass mailing, he instructed those Republican voters to return their applications by using an enclosed reply envelope that was addressed to the Texas Secretary of State's office. The problem is that applications must be sent to local offices, and the Secretary of State has a firm policy of rejecting any applications sent there. So that means thousands of Republican voters who receive this from the Lieutenant Governor may be deprived of their ability to vote because Patrick's efforts to sort of gum up the works actually may wind up gumming it up for Republican voters. I mean, how do you expect the Texas law to affect future elections? And do you think Republicans will be successful going forward in blocking participation by voters?
Yeah, well, what you're seeing from Dan Patrick is ineptitude at the highest level. Now, fortunately, the Secretary of State, despite the law that exists today, decided to go ahead and forward those mail ballot applications around to the various local county clerks. But what we're seeing, of course, here is two sets of rules that apply to Democrats and then rules that apply to Republicans, where the Secretary of State is willing to step up and forward those vote by mail applications along. But the ugliness of this law is already rearing its head. We're already seeing seniors across Houston, across Texas, be disenfranchised, get their vote by mail applications rejected. And this should not stand. We need intervention at the federal level. We're grateful for the recent legal turnabout in West Texas, making sure that that some of this law is struck down, but this needs to be permanently struck down and turned around. And to do that, we either need to throw the bums out here in Texas, or we need some help from the federal level.
All right. Well, thank you for the work in 2020. You clearly got more work to do. Chris Hollins, appreciate you, brother. Take care.